Welcome to the Rural Road to Health, the podcast about rural health careers, and rural communities. Joining us today is Dr. Cath Cosgrave, a rural changemaker, strategic advisor, trainer, coach, presenter, and evaluator. She has more than 25 years of experience working with rural communities, developing community-centered, strengths-based strategies to effectively address local health and community service needs. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So we like to start the Rural Road to Health off by asking how you became involved in rural health. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became more involved in rural health and rural community work?
Yeah, sure. Unusually, while I work in rural health and have made my life work, excuse me, to strengthen rural health workforce, I'm not a health professional. I actually have a sort of behind, started a PhD about 10 years ago, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in a little while. But before that, I had 25 years working in community development, first in international development, working in Southeast Asia on strengthening communities' health. And then in the last 10 years of those 25 years, I was working in rural communities in Australia, where I live. And so I was working in those to strengthen the mental health services in rural communities. And somewhere along the line, I got tired of good projects being not refunded and poor projects being refunded, and that it was difficult for whilst I was always very evidence-based and said, really committed to evaluation and external evaluation, that was not easy to communicate to others. And so in the end, I decided that I really wanted to sit on the other side of the table with the evaluators and learn to strengthen the evidence base and make sure that the right things were being implemented that had a strong evidence base behind them. So I got an opportunity to do a PhD. It was a bit like applying for a job. I'm a social scientist by background, so my first degree is in economics and my second degree was a master's in community development. And I'm a qualitative researcher and social scientist. So I got this opportunity to do a PhD, and I was kind of given my topic, which was to strengthen mental health workforce in rural communities. And from that, I was allowed to choose what I really wanted to do or study. So I wanted to tell a good news story because I was pretty naive. And so I wanted to do a study about why people stayed in rural mental health positions. It was looking at community mental health teams in rural and remote areas of New South Wales. And of course, it wasn't a good news story. It was a bad news story. And really what I did was a study on why people left. And there is the beginning of 10 years of work. So it was a grounded theory study. A grounded theory, the most famous grounded theorist is Brene Brown, and her courage and vulnerability studies. And my study is formulated, the methodology is like what Brene uses. So I capture the lived experiences of health workers working in rural settings, and then theorize about, from those findings, what it is that makes them do what they do or make the decisions they do. So in this case, the decisions to stay or the decisions to leave, and the decisions to come in the first place. So I finished that in 2016, then got quite a few opportunities in postdoctoral work to test that theory beyond the mental health workforce to all rural health. And in the last few years have been working as a consultant, rolling that out. The model off that I developed a framework, the Attract, Connect, Stay framework, which I'll talk about in more depth in a little bit. And that is now what we're rolling out. So, and over the 10 years since I started my PhD in 2012, I've been building that evidence to build the proof that this works. And there are some missing pieces that I've identified that and really developed what strategies need to be in place to address those. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of how I got into, so not a health professional, but very passionate about making sure that in rural areas we have access to health workforce and health services, and that the equity gap between our urban Australians and rural Australians doesn't keep growing. So we have much poorer health outcomes in rural Australia, and as a result of poor health workforce, and that problem's getting worse, not better, in the 10 years that I've been working in it.
Yeah. So that's really interesting and important work. And through your experience so far, what are some of the challenges facing rural communities when it comes to maintaining a health workforce?
Okay, so when I initially, when I started 10 years ago, I would have said it was about retaining a workforce. I would now go, it's about attracting a workforce in the first place. So that's the biggest problem communities and the health and social care services in those communities are facing. They struggle to attract or get any applicants at all to their positions, in particular specialist nursing, allied health, and GPs. There are, all of those are really the GP workforce has workforce challenges have been there for a long time, but are getting worse for systemic issues. That it's very difficult to run a successful business GP practice in rural Australia that you can earn a decent living on. And allied health has always been, there are particular challenges there around being able to attract that workforce. And specialist nursing is, probably where things are best is in the nursing area, because we kind of train locally and can still create our own workforces in rural. So most of the universities in rural Australia have a nursing qualification, and so it's about attracting newcomers. So those allied health, nursing specialists and GPs are all from out of area, and that's the kind of the focus of my research. What is it that attracts them, and what do we need to be doing to keep them? So. And that is the Attract, Connect, Stay framework underpins those key findings or the strategies we need to be doing.
Mm. And just thinking about the types of organizations or communities that you work with, are there specific kind of groups that turn to you, or is it a
Yeah.
community that comes to you? Yeah.
So it's a bit of everything, because the framework has a community and place component, and it also has an organisational workplace component and a role and career component. This is the Attract, Connect, Stay framework. So perhaps I might explain that first, and
Yeah, that would be great.
then I can talk about what are the so going back, the key findings from my PhD were there were three primary elements that most significantly impacted job and personal satisfaction. And job and personal satisfaction were the key determinants of whether people chose to take up a job or to leave a job. And those three primary elements were life stage, career stage, and degree of familiarity with the place or rural living. And what we know is that everybody from my PhD study, everyone went through a period of adjustment in the first 12 months. The first 3 months were particularly challenging in the job space, but also for any newcomers. And there was a real vulnerability at that point in time that if things weren't in place, the seeds of turnover would be laid, and it would be very difficult to turn things around. So we need to make sure that people settle into their job well and are connected well as any newcomers are settled into the community well. Uh, so um, so the theory was rural-based professionals' stay or leave decisions hinge on the gap between their life expectations and the realities of their job and rural living experience. And after 12 months, people usually they can put up with a job being less than satisfactory as they settle into that job and the community if they're newcomers. But after 12 months, they tend to start making that weighing it all up and deciding whether they're going to stay or leave. And so some of the things we know, so going back to those three factors, life stage, career stage, and degree of rural familiarity, I'll just quickly touch on things are different. People's professional and personal interests differ depending on what stage of adulthood they're in. And we struggle to attract because we tend to just and retain because we're not actually working towards what are the key interests and determinants for each career group. So early careers are generally really interested in skills development and support and career advancement opportunities. So it's really important to have professional development offerings in there. For middle adulthood, because they're in the family stage, flexible work arrangements, career opportunities in place are really important because it's all about work-life balance. And then senior adulthood, that's a group that we don't tend to focus our recruiting on, but they have a lot to give. They've reduced family commitments and would often consider coming rural for a period of time, and they're particularly they're interested in leaving a legacy. So career stage is pretty, early career experience is the first 3 to 5 years. But we know that people get, it's a bit of a baptism by fire. They get pretty experienced pretty quickly when they're working in rural because of the scope of practice is very broad. And the workers are recruited, so their familiarity with place and rural living is those workers that are recruited from elsewhere all need support to settle and connect, and that is the missing piece, and that is what I'm most well known for, this settle and connect in the community. And the more locals usually don't need it, but the more you've had little or no experience of rural living and this particular place. So overseas newcomers need the most support and work. And second to that, city newcomers who have very little experience of rural Australia and living in rural Australia and working in rural Australia. So that all of those things underpinned the Attract, Connect, Stay framework. And so the Attract, Connect, Stay framework, and hopefully we can put a link in the show notes. It has three key areas. So it's about we need to work on three things to make sure that we attract and retain staff. So in the workplace and organisational domain, it's working in a friendly, supportive and inclusive workplace. In the role and career domain, it's having opportunities to build skills and access career pathways in the local region. So that's something that we really struggle given the distances in Australia and the thin populations to be able to do that well. And it really requires collaboration between health and social care businesses and organisations to work together to make those offerings available locally. And then the community and place part is the part for newcomers and feeling settled in and being socially connected and having a sense of belonging. So I would go the single most important thing is that we're actually talking about belonging across the board, belonging in the workplace and communities. And this helps individuals realise their full potential and feel that they belong. And so we need a framework that's place-based, person-centred. It addresses the workplaces are inclusive and equitable, and we have social connection both in the workplace and community. And so that social connection or belonging thread is all through my work, and this we need to make sure that those things are in place both in the organisation from the very beginning, so we don't lay the seeds of turnover and tension in that first 12 months. So the study identified that, just to summarise, that first 12 months is really vulnerable. If we need to attract better and really focus on developing a pool of ideal candidates, recruiting them well, and then settling and connecting them both into the organisation and into the community. And then making sure that we continue to foster and support them for their personal and professional development. So we need to do all the things. And I would say that until this kind of work is very holistic and looks at all the factors, and so until my sort of, I mean, there's other research following this, and the World Health Organization has also said that things need to be place-based and holistic. But we've really, prior to this, the study is mostly focused on those professional factors, the professional development, team, line manager relationships, that type of thing. All those things are important, but so are these social components. And that was a really missing piece, the attract and retention rural health workforce space. So, and yeah, so that's the point of difference about my work, and that we need to have this more, and that there is, whilst we have a framework and some strategies, everything needs to be tailored for the context, and both the community context and the workplace context.
Mm. And listening to you, I think as a clinician myself, I can relate to those kind of stages that are quite important. So in that early career stage, you really are looking to learn as much as you can and develop the skills that you want to develop. And then later on, when you have family, it makes sense that you want things to be a little bit more stable and a bit more balanced. So I think that's the right kind of approach. And
Yeah. Yeah, and the general rule of thumb is, so I think we tend to use the words attract and retain, and we're not very nuanced about how we're using those terms. So if we talk about retention, retention is different depending on life stage. So life stage trumps everything. So if you're getting 2 years out of your early career, new grads, that's pretty good in a rural setting, because they're coming and they want experiences. That's what drives them. So you might be able to, with a good program, extend that to 3 years. But it's fair, turnover is pretty typical at the 2-year mark. So most services feel much better after I say to them, you're actually doing quite well if that's what you're getting. That's not exceptional. It's not poor, because life stage is the most important determinant of what the decisions people are making. In that middle stage, so they're relatively easy to attract, but hard to retain. In the middle adulthood, they're very difficult to attract because they've got all these family factors, partners, all the things in place already. And that's particularly why medical is difficult, because by the time they finish their qualifications, they're in middle adulthood and often have dependents, and everything needs to be tailored for both. So you need to be thinking about the partner as much as the worker, perhaps even more about the partner's needs. And so we've previously just sort of talked about retention rates, but if you really want to strengthen your workforce, you need to be kind of categorizing it into the challenges to attract. So categorizing the difficulty or how stubborn a position is to recruit, as well as having a look at who you're trying to attract and what life stage and career stage they're at. And so those that are newcomers, if you're going to have to attract from out of region, and they're stubborn to recruit, you're going to have to offer things to attract those, particularly if they're in that sort of middle senior band that they're very, we need a lot of effort to even get them to consider applying for the job. So, nothing's. It's. I think what I'm saying is the picture's more complex, and we we really need to think very holistically about and people think about people as individuals, very person centered. And I would go to anyone, just think about your own career trajectory and the reasons why you took or left a job are usually some mixture of both personal and professional. So we know it, but we haven't had it in the literature and we haven't had that evidence informed approach guiding human resources development and recruit campaigns. And we really haven't been doing the work to retain staff from the
Mm,
evidence base. So.
yeah. And kind of thinking about your Attract, Connect, Stay framework, how does your program work at a kind of practical implementation level?
Okay, I might just talk. So I've got 5 pillars. So there's attract. So that's about attracting a strong pool of ideal candidates. Recruit, and that's about recruiting the best fit candidate. And settle and connect new staff effectively into the organisation. All of those sit in the workplace and organisational domain. So they're the responsibility of the organisations to do that better. There's settling and connecting newcomers successfully into the local community, and that's both an organisational and a community responsibility. And I'll talk more about that. There's a special program for that. And then supporting staff in person-centred ways, the stay component, the 5th pillar. That's very much about collaborating with other health and social care services to see what positions you can create in the region to help attract people to stay and to make that decision that they feel that all people are interested in career development. So the challenge is to make that to keep people engaged and keep them feeling like their career is progressing in a rural area. In an urban area, a person would just change their job, but we don't really want to lose these people, particularly the more experienced ones. That they are really valuable, and we need to do everything that we can to make sure that they stay job satisfied. So the question was, remind me.
So, from a practical standpoint, how does the program work?
Okay, so let's just talk about this. The Community Connector program, which is that 4th pillar, the settling and connecting newcomers successfully into the local community. So mostly I work with communities and or organisations individually to implement all 5 steps. But the community part came out of working with a couple of health services in Victoria who were implementing the framework and said, how do you do the 4th pillar, the settle and connect in community? What's the model? What's the strategies? And I didn't have any. Nothing that, and not the evidence base didn't actually show anything that had been successful, except in the place of overseas refugees coming to some rural towns in Australia. There was some research around that, but no great programs. So I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship to go and investigate that challenge and see if I could find models. And I chose to go to Canada, and that was in 2019. And I got to travel for about 8 weeks across Canada, looking for models that were and why I chose Canada is they have all the same geographic challenges and thin populations, as well as more Indigenous people living in those rural areas. So lots of all the very comparable and a very similar health system. And I found a program in a place in Marathon, Ontario, that was called the Community Connector Program. And then so I came back and strongly advised that we did that. So that Community Connected program is all about supporting individuals at a family level to so helping attract good fit candidates, and then settling and connecting them into the community, providing a concierge service for the whole family. It includes partner employment and making social connections, finding housing, organising schooling, and doing all the things that helps fast track them to becoming rural, feeling like they belong. So that, the one important thing. So we working with communities. So they're like collaborations of health services coming from a region. They get together and we work towards establishing this community connected program. So there's about 5 programs in various stages running throughout Australia. So I did a pilot. I got some funding by a philanthropic organisation to create some resources, which are on the Attract Connect Stay website for the Community Connector program. And it's a free course that you can step your way through. And we now know what works in Australia to get this model up. So that's been the sort of results that program are getting is pretty impressive. So the very first site was in Shepparton in Victoria, a big regional area. And when we surveyed, so they'd supported 158 new professionals and their partners to move, in a 12-month period. And when they were surveyed, 8 out of 10 were intending to stay. They were surveyed at the 6 and 12-month mark. They were intending to stay over 18 months. So, and 100% of them had found housing. I'm sure you had the same problems that we do in rural Australia. Housing is an enormously difficult, challenging issue in rural Australia, particularly since COVID and movement of population. And 75% of partners had secured employment, 95% had secured suitable schooling. So it is a really missing piece. We know that once this program's in place and funded, so the challenge for communities is there's no government funding for this, and because we want it to be grassroots, community driven, and tailored for the context. We really want them to fund it themselves. And so that's a challenge for communities to raise the funding, but that's through the collaboration of health, social care, local councils, and other businesses that see the economic development importance of having a health workforce, that if their town is to survive, they must have health services. So in a couple of places, mining companies have underpinned. So certainly in Marathon, Ontario, the largest employer in that town was a mining company, and they had continued to invest in this program long term. So it's an individual usually. Sometimes it's more than one individual, and they do everything and anything. But I suppose the really key thing is that my study identified how important partners are, and partner employment is a key part of this. So sometimes we know that the work is going to be fine, but the partner employment it will be the make or break deal. An unhappy partner is a deal breaker and will lead to turnover. So we have a very holistic view, and we work both with the worker or the new worker and their partner and any children that need settling in. So that's the Attract Connect. So that's the Community Connector program, and the rest of it, to really get the value out of that, those organisations, the health and social care organisations, need to be doing those other 2 pieces. They need to be working on strategies that better attraction strategies, better recruitment policies and procedures that make sure they don't lose ideal candidates through slow recruiting, and really good onboarding that's welcoming and warm and connects them both socially, but also helps them settle into those jobs quickly, as well as the community connector. So you really need to, and the career development, you really need to be doing all the things to get the real value out of the program. The Community Connector program on its own, whilst valuable, isn't, is really, there were always three domains that needed to be in place to improve retention.
Yeah. And picking up on the community connector, who do you get to be a community connector, and what kind of things are they doing to make the clinicians and their families feel at home?
We always recruit. So the Community Connector program, usually in the establishment phase, some form of a committee or some governance structure will be in place. And it may be an newly established organisation or an existing organisation. So sometimes it's sitting in business chambers as a program that they're auspicing. So it just depends, depending on the community. Um, and they fundraise, or they get their partner organisations to contribute to this. And then once they're all ready and they've got those pieces in place, we head to recruiting a community connector. And that community connector is always recruited from the local community. So we want to leverage off their networks and how well they know their community. And it's great if they've also experienced being an outsider and what it's like to settle and connect, and what, they need to be warm, lovely, friendly, but highly strategic too. So whilst they're meeting with all these families, they also they become a really valuable resource for communities around what are the gaps that are hindering strengthening the professional workforces, and they get very experienced and very skilled about really understanding housing, childcare, and where there are industry gaps. So an example in Shepparton was a lot of the spouses were engineers who didn't have their qualifications recognised in Australia, and the community connector in that community worked with the local university and engineering companies to set up a program to match those people with engineering companies to then do training and support and help them get their qualifications recognised. So that was also a skills shortage. So they're constantly mapping and networking and filling the gaps of where's their need. So what they work with the family is, it's a concierge service that's around. The purpose is, or the aim is, to get them settled and connected as quickly as possible. So in terms of settling, housing's the first issue that we need to address. And from the moment they're the preferred candidate, we're usually working with them around what is available. And they've usually developed very strong networks, both with real estate agents and where there's other housing stock that may not be publicly listed. So this is about leveraging their networks. So housing, partner employment, schooling. So there are many examples of schools not having vacancies, but through the community connector and their connections, being able to open up doors that people can't open up on their own, which is that being local, knowing who to talk to and making things happen. If they're from overseas and they arrive, they'll be picked up from the airport. They'll have their help get an Australian license, an Australian bank account, and all those sorts of things. So depending on where they're coming from, but if they're coming from elsewhere in Australia, it's really those fundamentals. And then once those things are in place, that usually can take anywhere up to 3 months. And then we start working on the social connections thing. If those things are settled more early, then we'll start on the social connection. And that is about really working with what their interests are and trying to make connections in the community to help introduce them to the right people. So if it's a yoga class, making sure that if they turn up to the yoga class, they're welcomed. and or they go to, if it is about football, or it can be anything. So the thing we've realized is, we have kind of quite an old-fashioned view about sort of what social means, and it used to be, join the football club or the netball club, or go to the local church. Our workforces are much more diverse than this and have many more interests than that. And rural communities really need to modernise. And so, one of the key findings from my research is that people experience rural communities as warm and friendly, but not inclusive. And that's upsetting for rural communities to hear. But usually, I find that if we ask specifically, it's a specific ask, that we have a newcomer, we want these things for them, and can you do this for us? People are very willing to do whatever's necessary to do that. I think traditionally we used to do this for the new GP, and the difference about this program is we've systematized it, and we do it for every new worker. That it's not just special treatment for the new GP and their partner. It's and that we consider partners as equally important in the mix.
And thinking about kind of what you were saying about rural communities and how inclusive they are, what have you found that the community response has been to this approach?
Um, uh, so I think people, it's kind of like, oh, that's common sense. Why don't we do that? I think is probably the initial. And I'd say a lot of my research is kind of stating well, yes, these are common sense things, but we seem to have lost them. Like, think about the person when you're recruiting and all their needs to retain them, and think about their social. And so this one just is, it seems to very strongly resonate with communities, but also very much, if so, line managers in health and social care services will say to me, "Oh, yes, I always know it's the social parts that I'm losing staff with, or I'm aware that their housing situation is not ideal, but I don't either have the bandwidth to help or the skills." And that it's really not a job on the side of their desk, it's a dedicated job for someone in the community to be doing this work. And so, what it does is help line managers focus on that their job is to work on making sure the right things are in place for the onboarding and um, skills development and social connection in the workplace, and that they can feel confident that these other things for newcomers to the area are being addressed. And so it's working as a community to make sure that we're addressing all the things that are important. So most health services will be, it's particularly that program. I call it like the bright, shiny pink lollipop. Everybody wants to do that program. The harder work is in the workplace and organisational domain, the three parts that I said about better attracting, good recruiting, and strong onboarding. Those underpin you've got to get the workplace components correct as well and working better. And really attracting and recruiting good fit candidates both for the job and the community gets you halfway there to retention. And so I think those things, people have been scared to ask about fit for community, and what are the levels of interest you have, and how well do they match with our assets and geographical place and those sorts of things. And I really encourage them. The strategies we have is they're in the selection criteria. We discuss them in interview. You're not ranked on them, but it's about fit. It's about how well do we think you're going to, and how well do we think that we can support you in this place. So, if skiing's your passion, well, then you probably don't want to go to the inner remote parts of rural Australia. There's so you've got to kind of weigh up as well as those things that I said around life stage, career stage, and degree of rural familiarity, you've also got to go, how well do they fit with what your community can offer? And that's different in every community. I genuinely believe in every community there are workers that will be attracted to your place and your community. And communities have got to know what that is and make sure that they're marketing that in their job descriptions as well. So that's best done as a whole community through local councils, etc., developing good place-based resources for what it's like to live here, and what do you do on a weekend and those types of things.
Mm. And just kind of to summarize a little bit, what do you feel are some kind of key learnings that you've had through this process of implementing the Attract, Connect, Stay framework?
Okay. Probably it's the need to be patient. It's not just sort of something you pick up, excuse me, and implement. It takes time. It's really a cultural change program, both at the organisational level and at the community level. So really having that out, you've really got to be committed to um, uh, implementing this for the long term. So I certainly say to both communities and services, if you haven't got sort of a cultural, you're committed to doing this for the long term, then probably don't bother. In terms of the Community Connector program, ensuring that's sustainable is probably its biggest challenge. So we tend to ask committed stakeholders to fund a pilot, and then we're working on a fee for service for that concierge settlement and social connection service. And that's a real challenge in a rural community to get that. We haven't quite mastered that yet of what that looks like, but we're close. And again, the program needs to be sustainable. So it's a lot of effort for something to fold in a couple of years. So both patience and really thinking about what is getting all your fundamentals, getting well established in terms of your governance, how health services are going to work together, and how the Community Connector program is going to run and be sustainable. They're all take time. So I've got two sites, one in Queensland and another in New Zealand, and they've both been in what I call in the establishment phase for implementing the whole Attract, Connect, Stay framework, including a Community Connector program for 18 months as they get those governance components right and the sustainability components right. But I feel like they're like the getting your foundations of your house put in place. And once you then get going, you tend to have foreseen all the future challenges. So and you have strategies in place, and that the key stakeholders who are leading this program have learned how to work together. So yeah, so it's not easy, but I don't think there's. I think there's no. This is a very complex area that around strengthening a health workforce. There's no easy, one fixed solution, one strategy. We need really for that to be place-based, and organisationally focused as well as person-centred. So it's one recruit by one recruit and doing all the things. And I think, that most health managers that I speak to, they know that. They know that there are many systemic issues, but that are, that make recruiting and retaining staff in rural Australia challenging. But that alone there are many things that we, organisations and individuals, can do without systemic policy changes. So, and they're the things I'm focused on. Let's work at the micro and meso level, so the individual and organizational level, and hopefully we'll get some better policies and things. But if we waited forever, nothing will change. And rural Australians will continue to be without services and have uh, this gap in years of living. We die earlier, we have poorer health, all those things.
Yeah. And just thinking about kind of context and your framework, do you think that this framework would be transferable and applicable in other countries?
Absolutely, that's about people. So a good grounded theory is, let's go back to what I was saying, that a good grounded theory, of which all of this is the base of this is the PhD study, is about that you've developed a theory based on the lived experiences of people. And if that's accurate and you've asked the right questions and you theorize correctly, then it should resonate with absolutely any individuals. And so we have good connections in Canada, Scotland, and New Zealand. Everybody agrees that this is, yes, that's us too. And that should be the feeling with reading my papers, or visiting the website, that you should go, that it truly resonates with me. I absolutely get all those pieces. Yes, I agree that they need to be strengthened, and that the community connector part, or the fourth pillar, is a missing piece, and that needs to be in there as well. So it's everybody's responsibility to strengthen health workforce.
Mm. Thank you very much, Dr. Cath Cosgrave, for joining us today and talking about the Attract, Connect, Stay framework. It's been really interesting. Um, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
So hopefully in the show notes, we'll put the website. So that's the Attract, Connect, Stay website. On the front page, you can do a bit of a checklist to gauge where your organisation sits on the Attract, Connect, Stay framework, and book a call with me to discuss your results. And what I think might be good next steps for you if you're interested in implementing the Attract, Connect, Stay framework.
Amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing that with us today. And yeah, hopefully in the future we'll be able to connect again and talk about some of your work.
All right, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the Attract, Connect, Stay solution.
Please like and share this episode via social media or with your friends and colleagues who have an interest in rural health. If you want to contact me or share some feedback, you can do this at theruralroadtohealth.blog or at ruralroadtohealth@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to The Rural Road to Health.